Greetings pimps. Today we will be dismantling another ideology. This one is quite similar to the last one, but seeing a frankly embarrassing video inspired me to do it anyway. Said video being titled Anarcho-Communism, the only logical position. Right off the bat the video offers no arguments from logic at all, instead relies on non-argument appeals to emotion. The person claims to be all about logic and reason but instantly gets super emotional. He also fails to understand that an item doesn't have the same scarcity and worth across the globe, but I digress, as that is not a relevant point. Of course prices will be higher in places where incomes averages, minimum wages, and taxes are higher. That's the basis of the video in question. He goes on to cry about capitalism, which I do not condone, but I don't even need to mention that he has no valid concept of it and blames everything he dislikes on it. Not everything is socialism or communism, and not everything is capitalism. This is something most sides fail to realize, and it's quite sad really. For someone who claimed to be all about logic, he offered no objective moral objections. In my recent video I explained what I am about to repeat, so bear with me. UPB is the only secular objective set of moral standards that cannot be logically argued against in the context of debate. Trying to argue against UPB in the context of debate is like trying to argue language has no meaning. This would be self-detonating, in the context of debate. Also bear in mind that UPB has no issue with a voluntary to join and associate with income commune. This, however, is voluntarism as a whole. Different ideological towns that are voluntary to join may exist in an overall voluntarist world. The spread of voluntarism does not require any involuntary force. However, this is the point where incomes become immoral. In order to spread anarcho-communism worldwide requires involuntary force on those that would otherwise not interact with you. This of course does not contain the state, which is objectively moral to attack in any facet anytime. That statement assumes you understand how UPB proves the state is immoral. If not, this video is a little too advanced for you, not that it's advanced. Any ideology which requires involuntary force is of course immoral. One of the basic principles of anarcho-communism is all businesses must be worker-owned and ran. In a voluntary to join commune this is all well and good, however the issue arises when you actually attempt to spread the ideology. Any ideology that requires force to spread worldwide is of course not the most moral solution when one that doesn't require it exists. In fact, anarcho-communism rests on nothing more than emotion and the unknowing hate of Mother Nature, so to speak. Why is this? Well, as discussed in a previous video, some of the things incomes despise are in fact not immoral at all. Of course the state is immoral, yada yada yada, we all know that. But rent and profit are not theft. Without going on a huge spiel and making this longer than it needs to be, you have the objective moral right to own private property. People like to make up terms such as personal property, but that's just semantics of someone with no logical argument and someone who is not truly about getting down to the true roots of an ideology. All property is either private, public or unclaimed. Just as all actions are either moral, immoral or null. Very simple. To put it into the words of UPB, in order for private property to be immoral you would have to not have the right to self-defense, which you of course actually have. You would also have to have the moral right to forcibly prevent ownership of private property or means of production, which includes one's own body. You of course do not have the moral right to control another's body or steal. Without private ownership, theft is not possible. This is why an individual taking ownership of unclaimed or non-homesteaded things such as land is not theft. If there is a community basket of bread, so to speak, it is not possible to steal it. Of course this is barring any rules set forth when you join the community, but a thing that may be used by anyone at any time cannot be stolen, but it can be claimed. Now back to why rent is not theft. Since UPB proves you have the right to private property, the landlord has the right to own said land in question and guard it how he sees fit. You can of course usurp his land at risk of life and limb, but that is expensive and most would not throw their lives away for something so trivial, but to each their own. In order for rent to be theft, you would have to have the moral right to shelter. You of course do not have the moral right to be provided with shelter. In order for rent to be theft, you would need the moral right to force another to provide you with shelter, which you do not have. In this case, it is nature forcing you to seek shelter, not the landlord. In order to be objective, you must separate all actions from one another. Mother Nature is not human, so it cannot be immoral or moral. All its actions are null. The landlord's only action is private ownership, which we have already proven to be objectively moral by UPB, which cannot be argued against in the context of debate. You are not morally obligated to get shelter from the landlord, so choosing to pay rent or not live there is a voluntary choice in relation to the landlord. Nature may claim your life if you do not get shelter, but that is nature's action, not the landlord's action. Would it be nice if they let you stay there? Yes, but it is not immoral to deny you. Is it nice to give money to the less fortunate? Of course, but you are not immoral for not doing so, as one does not have the moral right to money. Are landlords mean? Of course, but their actions are not immoral just because you subjectively think they are mean. The ANCOM argument against rent and land ownership boils down to a non-argument appeal to emotion. No logic to be found. It shouldn't need to be said, but the statement "if you don't do this, person might die" is a non-argument appeal to emotion. If that makes you mad, that is just further proof it's an emotion-based non-argument. You must do this or bad thing will happen. Don't you have a soul? Now where have we heard that one before? Cough cough, statists cough cough. As you see, there are no semantics here, such as the term personal property. For all intents and purposes, private property as the definition used by UPB covers what a nuance user would call personal property. Wasting time identifying countless terms is not something we do here. I leave that for the people who try to stay away from delving into their beliefs like this. Profit is of course not theft or immoral either. I covered it in a previous video. This goes hand in hand with private ownership of the means of production. More or less it's the same reasoning behind it as why rent is not theft. Profit is not theft since you are not forced to work for said business owner. Let's break down the actions again so we can be objective. It is nature which forces you to have to eat, thus work, or at the very least hunt and gather, which is also work, but I digress. So it is nature forcing you to work or die. The business owner's only action is offering a job which pays a known set wage. Since the private ownership of the means of production is objectively moral as discussed, there is no issue here. You do not have the moral right to any more profit than voluntarily agreed upon by you and the business owner. You voluntarily enter the job and know the pay. You are not lied to and the contracted payment is not foregone. Once again, the only force in play is from Mother Nature, which is not human, thus cannot be immoral. If you are going to claim you don't voluntarily enter the job because you either work or starve, this leads us back to the force being applied onto you by nature. There is no force being applied on you by the owner, as you don't have the moral right to a job or food from others. This is the part where ANCOMs get super emotional and might even cry. The guy in the video wants to be all about logic and not emotion, right? This is what logic looks like. Logic which cannot be logically argued against in the context of debate. Am I saying denying someone food is good? Of course not, that is terrible and evil in my opinion. However, it is objectively not immoral. When looking on with logic, you must forego all emotion, which ANCOMs cannot do. Their entire ideology boils down to "but bad thing will happen if you don't do this." Just like statists when they pull the "but who would build the roads" card. All that out of the way, I must once again state that I am not against an ANCOM commune or even the ideology itself. I am simply here to prove that it is not a moral ideology and fully based on non-argument appeals to emotion. Of course they get some stuff right, like the state being bad, but they cannot prove the state is objectively immoral without UPB, so their ideology is at an impossible crossroads. They are faced with the dilemma of either they cannot objectively prove the state is immoral, or they agree with UPB and thus agree with the logical proof that the ANCOM ideology is immoral. Even if rent and profit were theft, it is still an immoral ideology, as attacking those two things was simply showing ANCOMs don't know how to apply the logic the video claim they use. Anarcho-communism cannot exist outside of voluntary to join communes without involuntary force. Voluntarism, however, can. As its only requirement is nothing. People do what they want. The state's gone, but if you wanted you could start a voluntary to join state, so to speak, where people pay taxes, etc. That's still voluntarism. Anything that is not voluntarism, of course you have the moral right to use self-defense against, aka the state, as it would automatically be an involuntary action. After the objectively immoral state is gone, bada bing, the entire world is now voluntarist. There may be instances where involuntary force will need to be squashed in self-defense, but that is for another day. Long story short, if it's voluntary, it's voluntarism. If it's not, then it's immoral. Of course you have the moral right to self-defense, but that goes without saying. It may be worth mentioning that no, fighting the landlord is not self-defense, as they have not aggressed on you, as you did not own the land they claimed and had no moral right to it. Taking ownership of something that is not owned is not theft or involuntary force, as already said. Mother Nature, as stated, does aggress on you, though. There is no way to logically argue against what has been said here in the context of debate, but I am open to rewording or better applications of UPB. In the future, please try to use actual logic when talking about ideologies instead of claiming to use logic. But your first supposed argument is, but hierarchies are bad, because then you go on a long convoluted rant without ever even attempting to prove why it's supposedly immoral. If you cannot tell by this video, forced hierarchies are of course involuntary force, thus immoral, but hierarchies in general are not. You do not have the moral right to be equal to another person, as you do not have the moral right to force another person to act a certain way, be treated a certain way, or treat others a certain way. Hierarchy is just a faux boogeyman. You do not have the right to prevent others from gaining so-called powers you do not have, unless of course it's something to do with a state or they are forcing something on you. It's not force being applied to you if Johnny down the block has control over a major business and gets treated better in society than you. Should you treat everyone as an equal? Sure. Is it lame that some people get privileges in so-called society you don't? Of course. But you do not have a moral right to be treated the same by people as they treat others outside of them not committing murder, rape, etc. against you. And any so-called extra privileges they have, you more than likely do not have the moral right to have. Meaning that such an extra privilege is not a moral right but not immoral to have, thus an action. It must be said that this of course has zero to do with state-given privileges or the like. I think that's all for now. We covered it from top to bottom. If anyone has anything to add, comment below. Reminder: unless you want to show me how I incorrectly applied UPB, there is no logical way to argue against anything said here in the context of debate. Any and all so-called arguments besides that will instantly self-detonate, as explained earlier. Anyways, we out.